I used to think that business and life was all about making money, but I don't any longer. I was brought up in a very wealthy family. Everything was about money. We had a chauffeur. I was taken to and from school we had staff. We had big houses. And this is the house I was born and brought up in. We had very nice cars. Everything was 5-star. My parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles all had businesses. So that was the language that I interpreted as I was growing up. In fact, the first words in the joke in my family, the first words that I said weren't mama or dada, but cash flow. That's how much I was into business. And all through this time, I was brought up, there I am aged 11 with these beautiful looking, well-dressed, designer-clothed mother and father, with, as you can see, them expecting me to become another successful business person or go into become an accountant or a lawyer and become equally successful. Well, I had other plans. I was a bit of a rebel at school, and I really wanted to leave as soon as I could and go into business or do something else. And I had a love of music, and that's what I did. That's me in the center as a drummer in the band Titus Oates, and we were huge in London. We had a really good following, but we couldn't get a record deal, so I had to think of something else. But that music and love of music took me into starting my own first business. And I got backing from my parents. They lent me some money. And I started a business that was renting sound equipment to touring bands. So you're hearing me through loudspeakers that are professional loudspeakers. We made things like that. And I used to go on the road, and my biggest client was a band called The Jam. And I don't know, has anybody heard of The Jam at all? No, doesn't mean anything here. They were big in the 70s and so on. Paul Weller and Style Council came from them. So I went round the world several times with The Jam, and then that became my first company sale. I sold my rental company to The Jam in a cash deal worth about 400,000 pounds, 500,000 euros today. And with that money, I invested it in a company called Turbo Sound, which actually is a competitor with the JBL speakers you're hearing me speak through today. So there's a bit of an irony with that. And over 10 years, I built that company up, both in the UK and worldwide, to international success. And to give you an idea of the scale of the company that I built up, there are the loudspeakers being used at the Monsters of Rock Festival. And there was Iron Maiden and other famous acts that appeared there at the time. And in fact, this system is in the Guinness Book of Records as the loudest PA system ever that was ever assembled. And I was particularly proud of our association with Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd used, and still all the bands like Led Zeppelin and others like that, Madonna and Paul McCartney, Glastonbury, used these speakers, and I'm very, very proud of that. And all was going very, very well. And I sold that business to a microphone company called AKG and made a lot of money doing that. And in the way of building that company up, I was really focused on everything to do with making money. And if anybody crossed us, if anybody tried to compete with us in an unfair way, I decided I'm going to be very aggressive and I'm really going to go after them. And this is an example of a company that tried to copy our designs in Canada. And I got my lawyers on the case and sued them, and we won. And I did a public chainsawing of the loudspeakers to put off anybody else from copying them. All the copying stopped. I'm telling you this because I want to illustrate my attack, my aggressiveness, the way that I was determined to do anything to make money at that time. And then I sold that business to AKG, a company that makes these microphones. And then I went off and did something else. And I co-founded a company that measures, manages, and advises on customer service. And on customer services in hotels, restaurants, and pubs, like the Savoy. And that company also did very well, grew it, and then sold it. So, you know, happy days, right? Happy, happy days. By then I had a family, I was making lots of money, and always going really, really well. You know, what could possibly go wrong, right? You know, you see movies where everybody looks happy and a love affair and they're fully in love, and we know that something's going to go wrong. Well, that's what happened with me. Big shock. So I was alone in my flat in London, which is where I'm from. And I suddenly felt my right arm and right leg tingling and then going numb. And then I noticed my right arm gradually doing this. I couldn't stop it. And then I tried to stand up to get to the telephone, and my right leg collapsed. My right side just stopped within 2 hours working. It was a real shock. So with my left hand, I managed to dial the ambulance, 999, and the ambulance took me to a local hospital in London. They didn't know what was wrong, not a clue. Nothing like this had happened to me before in my medical history. I said, what's the worst case? What could happen, worst case? You know, I want to know. And they said, well, Alan, you might have an aneurysm and you might not get out of here alive. Okay, I'd rather know than not know. So for 6 weeks in the hospital, lying, not being able to move, no use of my right side, they tried every test, and every single test came back negative. We don't know what's wrong. But I did have access to Wi-Fi. I had a computer. And I'm sure, like you, I'm active. You know, you want to keep going. You want to keep your brain going. So I started to read, and also thought, you know, if I come out of here alive, I want to make a promise to myself that I'm going to do something a little bit more meaningful than just chase money. And I'd learned from my family history that money doesn't buy happiness. And although there's that beautiful photograph of my happy parents looking fantastic, behind the scenes, that wasn't the case. They were very unhappy. So I wonder whether there's something else. I want to carry on in business if I come out of here alive, but I'd like to do something in a more meaningful way. So I started to investigate the internet, Google, research. I got books sent in to me, reading, and I discovered this most amazing book. Firms of Endearment. Now, look at the name, look at the words, the title. Firms meaning businesses, an endearment in English, the word dear is something soft, loving, caring. That sounds a bit odd. Firms of endearment. How can you have companies and dear in the same sentence? So I thought this fascinating. And these 3 people who wrote it are eminent business people in America. They advise Google and Apple. They're Harvard business professors. And they decided to follow 30 companies, 30 public American companies, who were doing really well on the stock exchange, who really speak to purpose, caring, looking after the planet, and decide to see, does that make any difference financially? Is it just doing good, or is it something that is also financially successful? And this is what they found. They looked at 30 businesses over 15 years, very thorough. The book took a long time to read. All the 30 companies they studied led with passion, with purpose, and looking after people, stakeholders, stakeholder well-being, and so on. And these companies, this is amazing, they significantly outperformed the Standard & Poor's 500 index. Now, Standard & Poor's is an American tracker of public companies. And the top 500 companies, Standard & Poor's 500, are the top performing companies in America. And they significantly outperform them. And look at this. This is a quote from the book. And I'll read it out. The highest, most sustainable shareholder value comes from focusing on key areas other than only profit. I thought, wow, that is amazing. I'm onto something here. And if I come out of here alive, depending, I still don't know what they're discovering and the weeks are going by, this is something I want to learn more about. So I carried on researching. And then the next thing I found, as I was looking into this whole idea, is the subject of my talk today, the quadruple bottom line. Has anybody heard of, please show a hand, if you've heard of either the triple bottom line or the quadruple bottom line? Thank you, that's one. And I usually find it's not very well heard of, but the triple bottom line is profit, planet, and people. And that was invented in the 1980s. And then more recently, there was one more addition. So let's have a look at what that is. Profit, of course, is bottom line. We all know what that is, I'm sure, if you own a business. People, that's the idea of stakeholders, of the people in the business, the suppliers, the clients, the customers, everybody involved in the business. How well does the company look after them? What's its culture like? What are the behaviors like in the company? That's all about people. Then the planet, well, I would imagine that says immediately to you what you can imagine. What is the company doing? What are we doing in our company to invest in the good of the planet, to decrease our carbon footprint? Let's look at that too. And then the new one, the fourth, the quadruple bottom line, is purpose. And the idea of this purpose is, why does the company exist other than to make money, which is a given? Is there a reason for being? And I'm going to give you some examples of that coming in a few minutes. So, the quadruple bottom line, profit, people, planet, and purpose, are the four parts of the quadruple bottom line. We're going to go into that in more detail. So let's link that now with the multiple. So once again, can I have a show of hands, please, if you understand what the multiple is? And don't worry, if you don't, I'm going to explain it. I can see a few hands. Thank you. So there's this idea that when you work out the valuation of a company, what it's worth, and particularly a private company, because with a public company, we know its share price, so we know what its value is. With a private company, there are many different ways of working out what it's worth, but this is one of the most commonly used, that we take the valuation and we take the profit of the company and we take a multiple, usually expressed as a number like 4, 5, 6. So for example, an accountancy company making €1 million turnover with 100,000 euros of profit, we might multiply that by 5 and get a 500,000 euro valuation. Does that make sense? I hope. Let's look at these two houses. I'm starting with this because I'd like to literally and metaphorically bring this home, this idea, and then get into more specific examples with businesses. These two houses, either side of the red line, I imagine they look identical to you. And if we look at them quickly, first glance, you'd think, well, they look exactly the same value, right? First glance. But let's look a little bit more deeper. The one on your left has got wet rot, which you can't see from the outside. You can only see when you look more deeply into the house and go inside and do a survey. It's also got dry rot, which you can't tell until you look more carefully on the inside. It's got an old kitchen. It's still got the same kitchen that when the house was built, the owners have done nothing to improve it. It's got a general lack of care. So as you walk around the house, go into the garden, things just feel like the owners didn't really look after it very well. And also, because the owners didn't invest in insulation, it's got a low energy rating. So that's that house on the left-hand side. Let's now compare it with the house on the right-hand side. Guess what? No wet rot. No dry rot. You can see where this is going, right? There's a new kitchen. The owners, a few years ago, invested a lot of money in putting together a new kitchen. There's a high level of care. The garden is in great condition. Walking around the house, no scratches. The paintwork's new. The furniture is in good condition. And guess what? It's got a high energy rating because the owners invested in insulation. So there are no trick questions in my talk today. Hands up if you think the house on the left is worth more. Good. And hands up if you think the house on the right is worth more. It's just for playing. Fantastic. So let's now look at coffee shops. Does anybody own a coffee shop in the audience? Nobody. Okay, so this is a way of looking and bringing it closer to business before I get into what I call the real examples. But the coffee shop idea is similar to what I just showed you on the houses. They have, in the moment we look at them, they've both got the same turnover and the same profits. And the one on one side has got a total reliance on the founders. The founder has to be in the coffee shop for it to work well. The other one, on the other hand, there's a succession plan. There's management coming up. There are good people beginning to take it over. On one side, they use any old coffee cups. They use any old plastic, stationery. They don't care. The other one, on the other hand, they're really careful. They care about paper coffee cups. They care about paper-based cardboard spoons and forks and so on. And they're really being careful with their environment. They take out their recycling every week. They really care about the environment. There are few repeat customers on one side, on one coffee shop, and on the other coffee shop, there are loyal customers that come back over and over and over again. On one side, there's high staff turnover. They're constantly having to go after new people, whereas on the other side, there's low staff turnover. On one side, there's poor financial controls. They don't really know what their numbers are. They don't have the finances under control. Whereas on the other side, there's strong financial controls. They know every euro, every cent, where it's going. So again, I'm saying to you, I'm sure it's pretty obvious by now, that the coffee shop with all the green, good stuff happening, to an investor or to a buyer, it's going to have a higher multiple of profit than the one with all the not so good, the red side. Does that make sense? Please, I hope. Yes, is this making sense? Okay, great. Thank you for sticking with me. Okay, so what I want to look at next is something a little bit more technical, a little bit more complicated, but I'd be grateful if you stick with me. A number of years ago, I was involved in a company that wanted to find out the history of private company sales. They wanted to understand why did some private companies sell for more than others, particularly when they're similar. Why? And they did research over several years, and they discovered the real reasons why some companies doing exactly the same thing are worth more than others. And this is where we're going to get into a little bit of detail. And I hope this is useful for you, for your own businesses or businesses you're involved in. And I'm around for the rest of the day and tomorrow. And come and find me if you'd like to go into this in more detail. Now, with the house and the coffee shop, I showed you red color. And the red color was all the things that brought the multiple down. This is really what goes on in companies. And the arrow on the left-hand side is the most negative effect on private companies versus the least negative. So everything I'm showing you here has got a negative effect on the company's valuation. Let's look at the bottom one. I'll go through them one by one. The external factors. Supposing there's a change in the law. I had a client once that made gluten-free food. Now, I know this may sound weird, but the worst risk they faced was that there'd be a cure for celiac disease, right? Supposing there comes a cure for celiac disease, that would wreck their business. That would be an external factor. The management team, is there succession? Is the business reliant on its owners? Is there control over the money it owes, its liabilities, control of its assets, and so on, control of its revenues? Is all the business with one client, or is it spread over many different customers? And what about costs? Are costs under control? So all of these things affect a business negatively. Okay, so I'm hearing, what's the link? So what? Okay, we can see how this might affect the shareholder value and the multiple, but where's the link with the quadruple bottom line? I don't get it. What I'm suggesting to you is that all of these things, all of the areas, profit, people, plans and purpose, can affect those practical numbers-based areas of a business's shareholder value. And obviously that's a bigger discussion, which we don't have time here today, but in all the clients that I've worked with, where I've helped them get investment, or I've helped them exit or sell their business or go for an IPO, when we've been able to demonstrate that every aspect of the business is affected by those four areas, we've managed to get a bigger valuation. So let's look at the other side of the equation. What affects the multiple upwards, the most benefit to the multiple? And these are the things here. So culture and talent, well, that's obviously people, behavior, values. It might sound a bit soft. Some of you may think this sounds a bit woo-woo, but actually demonstrating that the business has the capability of managing its culture and talent increases the value. Can the business demonstrate that it's got the capability for its systems and infrastructure, processes, procedures, etc.? Is it demonstrable to an investor or a buyer? If yes, that increases. Does it show that it invests in product innovation? I said earlier that I was involved with a company that manufactured, and still does to this day, professional audio equipment, microphones and loudspeakers. And we demonstrated every year that we were coming out with new, innovative products. That's why Pink Floyd and others used our equipment for so many years. And then what about product extension? You know, Disney. Think about Disney for a moment. Disney went from cartoons in the early 20th century to cruise ships. And theme parks, how on earth did it do that? Virgin went from a record label to a bank. And how did it do that? And other businesses, by showing that they could take the brand, Disney or Virgin, and extend it into other areas. And then what about positioning and brand architecture? How well is the brand known in the marketplace? The stronger the brand, the higher the value of the company. And scale, well, that's the ultimate. Why do Facebook, Instagram, and others, and in the early days, Amazon, get such incredibly high valuations? Because they were demonstrating from early on that they were scalable. So all those things help increase a company's value. And once again, I contend that linking that with the quadruple bottom line of purpose, profit, planet, and people, all of those can affect those areas. So I hope that makes some sense. So this is an example. To me, it's the epitome. When people say to me, Alan, okay, you go on about this quadruple bottom line, and, give me an example of your ideal company that does this. For me, it's Patagonia. Anybody heard of Patagonia? Well known as that in Lithuania. Okay, it's worldwide. I think it's a worldwide company, so it's well known. It's a good example. They are very profitable, worth billions. If you've ever bought any Patagonia clothes, by the way, well, they're expensive. They're very expensive. They've got very healthy margins. They look after their people brilliantly. It's got an incredible reputation as somewhere very good to work. And recently, the owners gave the company away to their staff. Can you imagine doing that? That's how much they're invested in people. Well, Patagonia, again, is the epitome of looking after the planet. They do everything they can to minimize their carbon footprint. Everything they make their clothes of is made of materials that's recyclable or made again. They've even got a new repair program now where you can send your brand new, well, maybe a year old, 18 months old Patagonia clothes that might have a rip in it back to Patagonia for them to repair and send back to you, rather than actually buy more of it. And their purpose couldn't be clearer: to save the planet. You don't get much clearer than that. So that, to me, that company is the epitome, shining example of the quadruple bottom line in action. Does anybody recognize this chap? I see a few. Yeah, a few. Great, thank you. His name is Warren Buffett, and he's the co-founder of one of the most successful investment companies in the world. He's a billionaire, multi-billionaire, and over decades he built up Berkshire Hathaway to be one of the most successful investment companies in the world. And he was asked recently, I wonder what the secret is of your success, right? People want to know. And he's known, by the way, as the Sage of Omaha. He's based in Omaha, Nebraska, in America. And every year, a little bit like Login, there's a festival every year. Now, 25, 30 years later, 40,000 people come to hear him speak in Omaha's biggest stadium. And he does a talk, they do all day, they discuss things. So he's a superstar of the investment community. And wouldn't you think, looking at somebody like that, conservative with a small c, he'd say something money-wise or numbers-wise or something like that? This is exact words. I personally meet the CEOs of potential investees. I look into their eyes and try to figure out whether they love money or they love the business. We invest only when they love the business. Who'd have thought somebody like that would use the word love 3 times in his answer. So, what I'd love you to take away from today, if any of this has struck a chord with you, if you decide to focus on profit and the others are less important, well, please focus as much or more on long-term sustainable profits than short-term gains. Think long-term. I'm not necessarily saying to think in terms like the Japanese that can sometimes think 100 years ahead, but 3 years ahead, 5 years ahead, not just the next quarter, the next 6 months. If you are going to work on your people and you think, yeah, it is worth investing in my people, work on your business's culture, its values from all stakeholders' points of view. It's hard work. It isn't easy. If you're going to look at planet, then look at every aspect of the business's operations to see whether you can reduce its carbon footprint in every aspect of what it does. And if you're going to focus on purpose, create a purpose statement, like Patagonia, to save the planet. Why your business exists, other than to make money, which is a given. So, folks, as you can see, I got out of hospital alive. I had a stroke. And if you're going to have a stroke, I had the best kind. I had a vasculitic stroke, and I'm hobbling around okay. I need a walking stick, but I made it. And I'm working with dozens and dozens of entrepreneurs who are taking on the quadruple bottom line and really believing in it and making money and planet and purpose and people. And if you want to find out more, there's a QR code. Even this old dog like me can learn how to do a QR code, and that will take you to my website. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Thank you.